we've done all the easy stuff, if you consider that all easy. Jackshaft, it's the hard part. You can't buy it, you have to make it. At least I don't know anywhere to buy it. The bearings are standard. I think they're 1 3/8 outside and 5/8 inside. It's the same bearing used for nearly every mini bike wheel, aside from Speedway, and every jackshaft. And then I buy jackshaft material in 3-foot lengths, just raw jackshaft material. So you gotta cut it. So I just use some tubing that goes in here easily, and then you can see that blue line that I marked off when I have both ends flush. And then I measure this. It's 7.5 inches. You can trust me on this. It's 7.5 inches. All Speedway jackshafts are 7.5 inches. So I'm going to use a cutoff saw to cut this just a smidge over 7.5. And the reason is that when I get my lathe out, I can make sure that that end of the jackshaft is really flush if I leave just 10, 20 thousandths on it. But I am going to use a lathe to drill and tap both ends of our 7.5 inch by 5/8 diameter jackshaft in. A little test fit here of our jackshaft, and I'm just a little proud on this side and pretty much the same on the other side. So it gives me some material to square off these ends in the lathe to make them perfectly flush. And they do need to be flush with the outside of this bearing, because we'll have a washer over it and a bolt, and that'll stop the jackshaft from moving back and forth. You have to do that. There is a method where you could cut threads on the outside of the jackshaft and obviously have it longer and put a nut on it. Some people like to do it that way. I just find that more difficult to put a 5/8 18 set of threads on the end, on both ends of the jackshaft. I find it easier just to drill them and tap them for me. And it's also less stuff protruding out. So less, because the foot pegs are right here. You don't want that stuff hitting you, having a big nut rotating there, opposed to a smaller bolt head. I think the smaller bolt head is ideal. So now, after drilling the ends, it's time to tap it. I use the lathe for this too. It's just easier to get it straight this way. Just go a little bit at a time. Turn the wheel in a little bit, and you can get a nice thread going here, doing it this way. And you obviously have to do both ends this way. We have our jackshaft ends drilled and tapped. I did them 5/16 24 fine thread. Then the next thing we need is some keyway. I'm using a 9-tooth sprocket on this jackshaft. If you're running a 4 horsepower motor or even a 5, I would recommend 9. That'll give you nice torque, a little wheelie action from the start. If you want a little more high end and a little less wheelie action, or you're using a bigger motor, you can go to 10-tooth. And this is number 41 chain, I should also state, 41 chain. But we're using a 9-tooth here, because I think I'm gonna go with a 5 horsepower and I want a little pep off the start. Now, this here is 3/16 inch keyway, and this is my torque converter unit. And so what I do is I line that right up on here. I get this end flush, then I cut it off there because we're gonna need a keyway. Conveniently, this has a keyway built into it, but then we need spacers. When the jackshaft is on here, we don't use set screws. For Christ's sake, don't use set screws for anything. They're just an accident waiting to happen. They'll come out or loose at the worst opportunity, and your jackshaft parts all come flying out. Forget it. Instead, you want to use spacers. So I'm using 3/4 inch stainless steel tubing with, I think it's about a 30 thousandths wall thickness. And I put a little piece of keyway in here. And then I put my jack shaft in here. You can see my spacer tube does not go over the keyway. Very important, because again, we're not using set screws for any of this stuff. Notice this thing, no set screws. Set screws are a waste of time. Forget them. You're not using little set screw spacers or nothing set screw. We're gonna cut this tubing to the thickness we need. The only thing that's gonna secure our jack shaft in is our 2 bolts. That's it. It's called minimal maintenance. This is exactly what you don't want to use on your jack shaft, is one of these spacers with a little key to lock it all in place. Instead, you definitely want to use spacers. Believe me, I've had this happen. You get this thing tight as can be, even put Loctite on it, and you're out in the middle of nowhere. This little set screw comes out, everything flies apart. You lose a keyway, and then you are walking home. I have my spacers cut. The small one goes on the small sprocket, that side of it. And this one goes between the small sprocket and the end of the torque converter. Now also note that there is a single washer down there. I buy 5/8 inch diameter washers, get them at Tractor Supply. And you're gonna put this thing together. Don't forget to install the belt. The Speedway belt is 20578. Don't forget to get that in. You'll have the whole thing assembled, and then you'll forget that. And you'll be yelling at yourself. And also don't forget the keyways. Like the one for my little sprocket already has a keyway built into it, which is very convenient. But don't forget this one so that you can put this together once. The jack shaft all installed with all the spacers. And I'm just checking my chain alignment. So what I use to do that is I just have a piece of angle iron here. It's small. I think it's 1/2 inch angle iron, 1/8 inch thick, 1/2 inch. And I put it against the inside of the sprocket here, and it should line up against the inside of the sprocket on the jack shaft. I know it's a little hard to tell, but you can kind of get a good idea if you have proper chain adjustment using this method. And that's how I cut the spacers. Well, certainly the small spacer on this side of the sprocket, getting that adjustment first, and then that dictates how big this one will be. Now, the other thing is, after you've tightened these bolts on both sides, your torque converter, your Series 20, with the belt installed, should still move freely without any side-to-side play. And don't forget the washer right there. You need one washer. You can see how close we are. If we didn't have a washer, it would be awful close to the engine. You do want the torque converter all the way this way, for sure, because the way the engine mounts, it just makes things easier. But you can't have, obviously, you don't want anything rubbing. So now that we've got that all set, we can cut a chain. I bought that roll of chain on eBay for 20 bucks delivered for number 41 chain. I have no idea how the guy could sell it that cheap, but he did. But anyways, so I got my length. This is the piece of chain I'm keeping. And what I do is I don't use a chain breaker. I just go over to the bench grinder and I grind the rivets off. You can see here, you see how the plate is smooth? And this is what it would look like before, and that's after. Then I take a chisel and I set it right in between there like that. Hit it with the hammer and knocks this plate off, and you're good to go. One hammer hit and that thing's broke apart. And then you just throw this piece out. Actually, both these pieces get thrown out, and you're ready to mount your chain with the new master link. So when you're mounting the master link, remember to mount it like this with the open end on this side, because the wheel turns like this. If you have it mounted the reverse, where the open side is on this direction, something could hit the chain and knock the clip off, lose the master link, and you are screwed on the trail.